The wind howled across the plains, dragging dust like dry whispers over cracked earth. Somewhere out beyond the nearest tree line, thunder rolled, deep and distant, like the growl of some ancient beast waking from slumber. A small wooden coffin sat half-buried under a crooked oak, crooked as the country itself. The woman standing beside it wore black, her dress threadbare, her boots soaked in the mud that came after last night's lightning storm. She held a baby, wrapped tight in wool, swaddled against the wind. She didn't cry. Not yet. High above her, barely visible against the ashen sky, a lone rider watched. Motionless. Horse black as tar. Man darker still. He said nothing. Did nothing. Just sat the saddle like a shadow made flesh. Clara Granger had buried her husband with her own hands. She'd found him crumpled near the mine shaft, neck snapped, eyes wide open to a sky he didn't see coming. The foreman said it was an accident. Others said otherwise, that he'd known too much, talked too loud. Men had vanished for less, and... Now Clara, a widow not even 26, stood alone in a place where law came late and death came early. The baby fussed. She hushed it gently, whispering into his ear, her lips trembling as she did. The rider watched a moment longer, then turned his horse toward the ridge trail and disappeared like smoke. They came on the third night. 3 men, drunk and mean, stumbling, out of the dark like wolves that smelled blood and weakness. Clara had just lit a candle in her wagon when she heard the crunch of boots outside. "Well, would you look at this?" one of them said, voice slurred. A little widow bird nesting, all alone. She grabbed the rifle, but it was too late. They'd already slipped past the canvas flap. One knocked it from her hands, sending it skittering into the dirt. "Don't want no trouble," she said. The baby had started to cry. "Neither do we, sweetheart." Another grinned, showing brown teeth. "Just came to warm ourselves up some. Thought maybe you could help." They didn't see the man step out from the shadows, didn't hear him either. The only warning was the metal whisper of a revolver clearing leather. Crack. One shot. Through the lantern. Darkness. Then chaos. 2 more flashes lit the inside of the wagon like lightning in a bottle. Screams. The heavy thud of a body hitting the earth. A third man broke through the canvas and ran, yelping like a dog with its tail on fire. When Clara looked up, there he was, tall, broad-shouldered, coat flapping like a flag in the wind. He didn't speak, just holstered his revolver and turned toward the door as if the whole thing had barely mattered. "Wait," she said. I don't have much, but I can give you something. You saved me." He paused, looked back. The candlelight caught the scar along his jaw, the dead calm in his eyes. He gave a slow shake of the head. No reward, no words. The baby, who'd gone quiet, reached toward him. Tiny fingers, open palm. The man's brow furrowed, just a hair. Something old flickered behind his eyes. Pain, maybe. Or memory. "You got place to stay?" Clara asked. He said nothing. "You'll freeze out there tonight. Least you could do is have some coffee." He hesitated, then gave a single, slow nod. Later that night, after the baby slept and the wind died down, Clara poured 2 cups of coffee beside the campfire. He sat across from her, eyes always on the dark, back never to the fire. "Name's Clara," she offered. He said nothing. "You got a name?" He looked at her finally, held her gaze for a beat too long. Then, "Vale." She blinked. Vale nodded once, and that was all she got that night. By morning he was chopping wood. The days passed slow and cold. The man, Jonas Vale, didn't say much, didn't smile. But he fixed her wagon wheel, restrung the line over the mule's yoke, hunted 2 hares and left one hanging by the wagon post, cleaned and gutted. The baby took to him oddly fast, followed, him with wide eyes, reached for him with sticky fingers. Sometimes Clara caught Jonas just watching, like he didn't know what to make of it, like it scared him more than the 3 men he'd gunned down. She didn't push, not yet. But she noticed things. He didn't sleep long. Would sit with his back to the fire, rifle on his knees. He never let his guard down, not fully. And some nights he'd whisper names in his sleep, Names she didn't recognize. A woman's. A child's. She never asked. Then, on the 5th day, they passed through a dying town, Dry Bend. A saloon half-burned, a post office long shut. No sheriff in sight. Clara went to buy flour. Jonas waited with the baby. That's when the barkeep's boy said it. "Heard there's trouble comin'," the boy whispered. "Some folks say that widow's man got mixed up in a gold job. Didn't. Play quiet. Now the Red Butte boys are lookin'. They come this way, ain't nothin' here'll stop 'em." Jonas didn't flinch, just stared at the kid till he went quiet. Later that night, Clara asked, "Did you hear what that boy said?" Jonas stirred the fire, no answer. "I think it's true about my husband. He worked the mine, knew the foreman. Said some of the gold shipments were light. Thought someone was skimming, then he died." Jonas finally looked at her. Not shocked, just resigned. "I think they're coming for me next," she said softly. "Think they want to clean up." She didn't expect him to say anything, didn't expect comfort. But what he did next surprised her more. He stood, walked to the wagon, took a satchel from beneath the floorboard. Inside, a Colt Dragoon, a sawed-off rifle and a stack of wanted posters, yellowed and folded. The name at the top of one read, "Jonas Vale, reward, $5,000 dead or alive." Her breath caught. "You were," she began. He cut her off with a look, not angry, just done. "What happened?" she whispered. His hand grazed the scar on his jaw. Then he looked at the baby, looked long. He sat back down and stared into the flames. She didn't ask again. By dawn, they were gone from Dry Bend. By nightfall, a man rode in from the south and asked the barkeep about a woman with a baby, and a man who didn't talk much. When the barkeep said no, the man smiled, then slit his throat anyway. Back in the hills, Clara wrapped her baby tight and looked across the fire at Jonas Vale, her guardian, her shadow, her warning to the world. Whatever had broken that man hadn't killed him. Not yet, but something was coming, and when it did, she knew. He'd be ready. The wind carried warnings, whispers in the leaves, the crackle of brittle brush under hoof, distant howls that were not quite wolves and not quite wind. Clara had stopped asking questions. She read the world like a woman forced to survive, alert to every shift in light, every sudden silence. But Jonas Vale, he didn't react. He simply knew things were changing. On the 5th day of their journey deeper into the wilderness, the wagon axle cracked just beyond a gulch riddled with gopher holes. Clara cursed under her breath, trying to lift the thing with nothing but stubbornness and grit. Jonas didn't speak, just took off his coat, wedged a boulder under the wheel, and worked the repair with steady, methodical hands. That night, wolves came. They circled the camp, eyes like embers, teeth white against the dark. The baby whimpered. Clara reached for the old rifle, but Jonas was already there. He stood between the fire and the dark, pistol drawn, steady as a stone monument. No shots fired. Just his shadow, long and silent, daring the wild to come closer. The wolves did not. A few nights later, Clara found herself crouching by a spring gone foul. The water had turned, brackish and dark, stinking of rot. She backed away, but Jonas had already knelt down. He stirred the earth, found the clean source. Upstream, and with a heat-blackened pot and strips of cloth, made them water again. They didn't speak much, but something had shifted. One evening, as dusk settled like smoke, Jonas approached her with a rifle. He offered it, butt first, eyes steady. Clara blinked. "You want me to shoot?" He didn't answer, just nodded. Toward the rocks. Set up a can. Stepped back. She gripped the stock with shaking fingers, awkward and unsure. He stepped behind her, silent, reached around to adjust her stance, repositioned her shoulder with a light tap. The silence between them grew thick but not uncomfortable, just full of weight. She fired, missed. He didn't flinch, just walked, picked the can up and set it back again. The second time, she clipped it. The third, she knocked it clean. That night, she found a small wooden rattle sitting on the windowsill of the wagon, roughly carved, the handle wrapped in a strip of leather. No note, No words. She looked toward Jonas, seated by the fire, eyes locked on the tree line. "Thank you, Mr. Vale," she said. He didn't respond, but he didn't correct her either. Far up on the ridge, someone else was watching. A figure cloaked in deerskin and shadow, standing silent against the horizon like part of the land itself. He had seen the wagon, seen the woman and child, seen the quiet man who moved like a predator, always listening, always watching. He watched, and he waited. It was the meat. A rabbit gone bad, or maybe the water hadn't boiled long enough. Clara collapsed one morning just as the baby started crying. She clutched her stomach, pale and clammy, shaking with fever. Jonas caught her before she hit the ground. She mumbled something he couldn't understand, then passed out. He didn't wait. He saddled the horse and rode north toward the canyons where old herbs still grew in the higher air. His coat flapped like a broken sail behind him as he pushed the mare hard through the switchbacks and sagebrush. The ambush came sudden. 3 shadows from the rocks, rifles raised. Bandits, maybe Red Butte scouts, maybe just vultures drawn to the smell of desperation. The first bullet clipped his shoulder, the second missed. Jonas rolled, fired twice. One man fell, the other 2 scattered. He bled hard, clutching his side as he pressed on into the rising dark. His vision narrowed, the edges dimmed. Then nothing. He woke to firelight, ragged walls around him, a cave, smoke curling up into a narrow shaft above. He moved to rise and hissed in pain. His shoulder had been stitched. A poultice packed with crushed root and pine gum was tied across his ribs. Across the fire, a man sat cross-legged, stone still. He was younger than Jonas maybe, but weathered like an old tree. His eyes were sharp, his hair braided in long black cords down his chest, feathers tucked behind one ear. He wore a necklace of bone and turquoise, but no weapons in sight. Jonas studied him in silence. "You should be dead," the man said finally, voice low and even. Jonas nodded once. Wasn't the first time. The man didn't smile. "My name is Dakota," he said. "I watched you, the woman, the child." Jonas didn't respond, just looked down at the fire. "I lost my people," Dakota continued. "Soldiers came after the snow melted, burned, everything. My brother's blood still stains the rock beside our river." Jonas met his gaze. "I lost them too." The fire cracked. Neither man blinked. Dakota reached into a leather pouch, pulled out a satchel of herbs, and handed it over. "For her," he said. "If you ride now, she might live." Jonas stood, slowly, painfully. He looked to the mountain pass, then back to Dakota. "You saved me," he said. Dakota looked toward the stars. "No," he said quietly. "I remembered." The ride back took most of the night. Jonas swayed in the saddle, half blind with pain. When he reached the camp, the fire was cold and the wagon dark. He found Clara lying curled on the bedroll, skin hot, breathing shallow. The baby whimpered. Beside her, lips dry from hunger. Jonas crushed the herbs with shaking hands, boiled them, held the cup to her lips. She barely drank, but she drank. Then he cradled the baby, small, pink, and trembling, and rocked him with arms that had once held a daughter not so different. That's when it happened. The sound. The crack inside him. He didn't speak, but his face broke, his jaw clenched, his eyes filled. And the baby cried harder, as if mourning something it couldn't yet name. Jonas held him close, and let the ghosts come. He saw the battlefield again, the smoke, the bodies, his wife's hand slipping from his grasp, his little girl calling his name, lost in the fire. He saw it all, and said nothing. Dakota watched from the ridge above, unmoving. The wind caught his braid. He looked down at the small fire, the trembling man holding the child, and slowly reached. Into his pouch, he pulled out a talisman made of river stone and red string. By morning, it sat at the base of the wagon steps. No note, no message, just a sign. The land had chosen its side. The horizon burned red, a distant blaze lighting up the dust-choked sky like the wrath of hell itself. Smoke curled from the tiny settlement of Cedar Hollow, a scattering of weathered wooden buildings pressed against the endless plains. The Red. Butte Boys had arrived. Word traveled fast in these parts, carried on the wind like a warning whistle. Jonas Vale stood silent at the edge of his makeshift camp, the baby sleeping softly in Clara's arms. A faint breeze ruffled his coat, the black fabric blending into the shadows of the coming night. He knew they were coming. They always came. Days before, a man who dared speak to Clara had been found, tortured, left for dead, but alive enough to tell the tale. His screams had echoed across the valley, swallowed by the indifferent earth. Now the killers hunted, not just a witness but a symbol. And Jonas? He was their next target. The barn behind the wagon creaked in the wind, empty but for the shadows Jonas had planted carefully. Rough scarecrows, ragged clothes stuffed with straw, faces painted in mocking grins. But the real graves were shallow ditches he'd dug beneath each, their depths a silent warning to what would come if the Red Butte Boys didn't stay away. Clara watched him work in the late afternoon light, her eyes narrowed with a mix of fear and determination. She held the baby close, the tiny fingers gripping her sleeve like a lifeline. The silence between them was thick but not empty. "You're making traps," she said quietly. Jonas didn't look up. "You want me to help?" He nodded once. Together, they strung wires across the fences, hidden lines that would trip unwary feet or horses. Jonas fashioned deadfalls from old timber, and Clara sharpened sticks into spikes. Each small act was a battle against the helplessness, clawing at their throats. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, a figure emerged silently from the shadows. Dakota. His face was stoic, eyes like flint, his presence as natural as the night itself. Without a word, he joined them, his hands steady and sure as they helped set traps deeper into the brush. The three became a quiet force of nature, no words spoken, but trust growing like a sapling amid the dust and danger. Then the baby laughed, a bright, sudden sound that cut through the tension like a crack of thunder. The sound pulled Jonas's gaze away from the fence line. For a long moment he just watched, the child's joy pure and untarnished. His eyes glinted, something fierce and aching beneath the surface. Nightfall came fast, and with it, the Red Butte Boys. They rode like demons summoned from the earth itself. 10 men on horses, dust swirling around their hooves, torches burning like hellfire. The settlement shuddered beneath their arrival. Jonas stood ready in the shadow of the barn, gun held low but steady. The first shot was a whisper, then a scream. Chaos erupted, gunfire tearing through the night, the air thick with smoke and fear. Jonas moved like a ghost, cold and ruthless. Each shot was precise, each movement deliberate. He didn't hesitate, he didn't falter. From the darkness, Dakota struck, arrows singing through the air, silent and deadly. He appeared like a phantom, knife flashing, vanishing before a single man could scream. One of the Red Butte Boys howled and disappeared into the black, dragged into the night by an unseen force. Amid the firefight, Clara stood trembling by the back fence. A man broke through, eyes wild with rage. She raised her rifle, hands shaking violently. The shot cracked. The man collapsed, blood blooming in the dirt. Jonas was beside her in a heartbeat, silent but steady, steadying her with a hand on her shoulder. Her breath came hard, eyes wide with shock and something else, a raw, terrible strength. The night stretched long. When the last bullet was spent and the Red Butte Boys lay broken and silent, the 3 survivors gathered the bodies. The snow had begun to fall, softening the brutal scene, but not erasing the blood spilled upon it. Dakota left at dawn, as silently as he had come. Before he vanished into the pale morning mist, he pressed a blade into Jonas's hand, a war-etched knife, its edge worn but deadly. No words, no promises, just a gift and a farewell. Jonas looked down at the blade, then up at Clara. Their eyes met, brief, charged. He reached out and held her hand. For a fleeting moment, she didn't pull. Away, and the wind whispered on, carrying the promise of more trials to come. The cold had settled deep into the bones of the land. Winter was no gentle visitor here. It was a relentless force, driving down the last colors from the trees and locking the earth beneath a hard, unyielding frost. Clara and Jonas had long stopped talking about the past or the future. Instead, they had carved out a fragile existence, wrapped in the hush of snow and the quiet crackle of a wood stove. Inside the small cabin by the river, the baby slept on a patchwork quilt, warm and safe. Jonas sat in a battered rocking chair, a torn Bible resting open on his knee. His voice was rough, a low whisper barely carrying over the steady tick of the wind outside. "Be still, and know that I am God," he read, voice gravelly, slow. His eyes, dark and distant, watched the flickering flames dance in the hearth. Clara stood by the window, watching him. It was the first time she had seen him smile, just once, soft and unexpected, like sunlight breaking through a storm cloud. He caught her looking and nodded, just a slight lift of his lips, then returned to the words that seemed to hold him steady. The peace was fragile, hanging by a thread none of them dared to pull too tight. Then came the shadow that no one could run. The marshal arrived with a posse, boots crunching in the snow, eyes cold and merciless. His face was familiar, twisted by corruption and greed, tied to the Red Butte boys by more than just crooked deals. He carried a bounty for Jonas Vale's capture, dead or alive. Jonas did not run. When the marshal called out his name, he stepped forward silently. No words, no struggle. His hands raised slowly, surrendering to protect Clara and the baby sleeping inside the cabin. The town square was filled with a restless crowd. Faces were a blur beneath hats and scarves. The cold sliced through clothes and the wind whipped Jonas's coat like a dark banner. No trial, no justice, only a rope, cold and unforgiving, waiting to claim him. As the noose was placed around his neck, the world narrowed to a pinprick of fear and silence. The sun slipped behind the hills, casting long shadows over the waiting faces. Then, movement. A shadow darted across the ridge, swift and silent. Arrows tore through the stillness, striking men down with deadly precision. Chaos erupted. Jonas struggled. Against the rope, the rough fibers biting into his throat. But his hands were free enough to draw his revolver. Gunshots cracked, echoing against the frozen earth. Dakota emerged from the smoke and darkness, fierce and unyielding. Together they fought, their movements a blur of desperation and skill, weaving through alleyways hunted like prey but refusing to fall. But the night held its own cruel hand. An arrow found Dakota's side, sharp, merciless. He stumbled, pain etched into his face, but his eyes never left Jonas. "You were always one of us," he whispered, voice ragged, as they reached the mountain's edge. Jonas caught him gently, carrying the fallen warrior back to the sacred cedar grove where the ancient trees stood like silent sentinels. Burying Dakota beneath the evergreens, Jonas lit a fire. The flames danced up into the night as he sang an old, broken tune, half prayer, half memory, his voice rough and filled with grief. Winter passed into spring. The baby grew, laughing more freely under Clara's watchful eyes. The small cabin by the river became a sanctuary, a fragile beacon of hope and new beginnings. Then one morning, Jonas saddled his horse, kissed Clara's cheek softly, and rode out without a word. All he left was a note folded carefully and tucked beneath the hearthstones. "Keep him safe. You gave me peace." Years drifted by like the slow river. The boy, now grown, found a revolver buried beneath the hearth. Worn but cared for, a relic of a man who had said little but done much. He asked Clara about the gun, about the man who once held it. She smiled softly, eyes glistening with memories and unspoken stories. "A good man who didn't need words," she said. "Some legends are carved in stone, others are written in silence." Jonas Vale never spoke much, but when he did, he chose to act instead. If this story moved you, give it a like, drop a comment, and subscribe. Because in the end, we all carry the stories of those who came before us. and some, like Jonas, remind us that silence speaks the loudest.